Hi, and welcome back to SCI Coffee Break. And again, we're with Pat Bolger from Hornbill. Hi, Pat. How are you?
Hi, David. I'm all fine and dandy, as they say.
That's good. That's quite positive, actually, Pat. Especially after the last sort of four or 5 months that we've seen, isn't it?
Indeed,
That's quite
indeed.
good. Quite good. So in these coffee break series, this coffee break series, we've been discussing a new publication from Hornbill, which is focused on the path out of COVID-19. And we've been talking about all types of stuff. In this one, we're gonna concentrate on stage 3 that you mentioned there, which is about collaboration. So it covers self-service, it covers return to work strategy and collaboration. Now, I know we've touched on collaboration a few times recently, and I know how passionate you are about it and the value that you've seen from an organization becoming more collaborative and working more collaboratively. So we'll maybe touch on some of that. And in fact, we did have a couple of months ago, we did a series about a smart guide that you published. And I think you've got a link to that in this document too, about creating effective collaboration, which was a really good read, actually. So that's still available by the looks of things, which is great. Yep. How successful was that? How much in sort of engagement did you get from that? I'm assuming it was pretty well accepted.
Cool. It was really well accepted.
Yeah.
I think the challenge for most organizations is that they don't really define what collaboration means. Mm-hmm. And I think the best way to do it is to basically look at collaboration as a way of working out in the open, being open and transparent, sharing everything that you find, publishing what you're doing, what you work, and inviting others to comment and to narrate on it. And that to me is a completely different approach than just me and you doing a Zoom video chat. Yeah. It's totally different because it exposes what your organization's up to, it exposes your plans, it exposes your weaknesses, and invites others to comment on that. I'll give you an example. One of our developers who has a bit of a penchant for writing keeps kind of saying, oh, actually, can you change your marketing content here? I mean, if we weren't a collaborative organization, that type of thing would never happen. Yeah. It just wouldn't happen.
Yeah, and that's quite positive because you get different value then from different brains, don't you?
Absolutely right. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. And anybody's interested in going back and watching those videos on this YouTube channel, you can. There's some really good stuff there, and I urge you to do that actually as well. So let's talk about some of the stuff you've got in this document. Now, you talk about one section. You mentioned the local digital declaration, right? So I was really interested in what that is. So obviously you've done some work to understand that. What is the local digital declaration, Pat?
It's actually a document that was produced by a number of public sector bodies here in the UK. And basically, it outlines an ambition. If I remember correctly, it says something like co-creating the conditions for the next generation of public services where technology is an enabler rather than a barrier to service improvements, and services are a delight for people to use. So the document goes on then to outline a number of principles. There are 5 in total. And the 5th one basically says something along the lines of we'll embed an open culture that values, incentivizes, and expects digital ways of working from a workforce. That means working in the open. It means sharing your plans, your experience, and working collaboratively and using good practice. So that's just from memory.
That's really
I'm
impressed.
I may have got some of that wrong. So, but essentially, it's the point they're talking about working out loud, sharing our ideas and the information we find, rapidly tapping into knowledge locked within different teams. So these are the types of things, with knowledge management being a classic case in point. This industry has tried to do it for a long, long time. We ignore the fact that actually about 10% of the knowledge that's going around their organizations is actually documentable knowledge. The other 90% happens when you're having a chat with someone. It surfaces on the job. It never gets written down. So in a collaborative environment, that happens as a matter of course. So the knowledge you produce is a byproduct of just talking and getting work done. And that's a completely different approach. And it can absolutely change an organization's destiny in terms of the knowledge. When someone walks out the door, all that stuff gets retained.
In your experience, is that easier to implement in a smaller organization? And if that's the case, does that mean that smaller teams work in collaboration with a larger sort of collaboration cycle across siloed, in inverted commas, siloed teams? Is it easier in a smaller team, do you think?
I think it is. Well, it is easier and it's not, because small teams think we don't need to collaborate.
Yeah.
We're all kind of working together, we know what each other's doing and stuff like that. But the fact of the matter is, we know the way that you find knowledge these days. You Google it. Quora is it's not a platform I particularly like myself, but it's a classic example of how knowledge really works. Someone asks a question, load of people answer it, and then the best one actually goes up to the top. So you get the cream, the best answers actually floating to the top, and the other ones disappear. Yeah. You can have people liking it to validate it, all of that type of stuff. So that to me is the question comes up, people give an answer, and then it's voted to the top. And I don't see knowledge management in IT service management working in that way. It just doesn't happen.
No, I don't.
Yeah.
I personally, and we've all worked in that environment. I still think that knowledge management's got some way to go for it to become what it should be seen as, and seen from a value perspective in organisations as well. Not just a tick box, not just a process to follow. I think it's a long that in many organisations I've experienced and ones I've worked in as well. So I agree with that. You were almost spot on, word for word, which I'm amazed at. To be honest, I'm absolutely amazed at that. So the vision, and I love this. I do. Now making this happen is another thing, right? But it talks about embedding an open culture that values, incentivizes, and expects digital ways of working from every member of our workforce. That's a great vision, right? And I almost feel like, as part of what we do in Service Desk Institute, that should be part of what we try to encourage through these types of engagements, through events, to sort of shape and influence how people should be acting. I wanted to talk to you about contextualizing all that. You've done it, which is fantastic, right? In a remote environment, you mentioned collaboration in a remote. Do you think it's easier then in this environment when we work remotely? Do you think it's easier or is it less easy? And you mentioned as well remote working. Do you think? I think it states in the document actually that remote working is here to stay. Do you think that's the case?
Again, it depends to some extent. I mean, it depends on what happens with the management of this crisis, and if we can manage to avoid a second peak and stuff like that. But the easiest thing for most businesses is to go back to what they were doing before.
Yes.
That's the easiest route. I think the most difficult route is to basically fundamentally change the way that they work, the systems they use, and the entire structure of the organization. That's a difficult thing to do. And not a lot of people are going to have the stomach for that. But I think the ones that try to go back to the old ways are going to suddenly find that they're outmatched and outpaced left, right, and center by the organizations who said, no, this heralded a seismic change within the industry, and we need to actually adapt what we do to reflect that.
Yeah.
So I think the whole idea of collaboration, yes, it fundamentally makes things easier, but there are other challenges. So this whole idea of remote working, it works well. I mean, let's face it, a lot of employees have not been through this and they know that they can work remotely. And quite rightly, they're going to say, actually, why am I being dragged 2 hours across London to sit in front of a phone and a computer when I can do that without ever leaving my house? So demand is going to be there for it, first and foremost. The challenge is, and I think Jerry did a session with Paul, if I remember, Jerry, our CEO, and Paul, your chairman, and
that's right.
They did a session where they talked about it. And I think the main point of that was the management practices that we have in place currently are all location dependent. They're all built around an office environment where you see someone, you can chat to them, and that's the bit that organizations are really going to struggle with. I think if you've got a collaborative environment, that's a hell of a lot easier than if you haven't. So, yeah, so remote working collaboration, I think they do go hand in hand, and it works really, really well. But I do think, well, the predictions are at the moment, Gartner is saying 74% of CFOs are saying that they'll move a significant number of previously office-based people into permanent remote working. And the projection is that prior to the crisis, the amount of the workforce, the percentage of workforce that was working remotely was about 5%. And that's going to amplify to about 30%. So a 6-fold increase in remote working.
That's significant.
So if you had challenges before with your service management, those are 6 times greater than they were just a few months ago.
Listen, and that throws up a whole host of new sort of questions, isn't it? So if you take away footfall from somewhere like London in an environment in maybe, I don't know, where in the banking sector maybe, right? If you've got the banking sector, so you're all around bank, and you've got people walking around buying stuff in shops and buying food and stuff like that, and all of a sudden that footfall disappears because they're working from home. What does that mean? What does that mean for London? What does that mean for the commerce and how London actually operates, for example? So it opens up a whole new host of questions in relation to the old and the new.
Yeah.
which are huge. And it also opens up the question, I think, and you're right, you did allude to it with the conversation. I think we'll see another video soon with Paul Rodriguez and Jerry Sweeney from your guys talking about some of this. And one of the questions I think is about the disengagement of staff. What does it mean for an individual to work remotely? How do they maintain engagement? How much more time and effort does that take? Any thoughts on that, on addressing that, the potential of disengaged staff through remote working?
It's a big challenge for middle management because everything that we've done up to now has been, as I say, location dependent. And I think those practices are going to have to change significantly over the next little while. Of course, staff well-being. That's another thing that we're going to have to, do you have something that basically allows your staff to say, hey, how are you feeling today? To maybe highlight challenges and where someone might actually be struggling. But the other aspect then is just basically presence.
Yeah.
How do you know when people are at work? How do you know when people are available? Can you interrupt them? All of those things are major questions that we really need to have to think about. And I think the approach there is that as much as the organization is going to have to provide everything that employees need to function in this new normal and remote working, employees are going to have to provide the evidence that organizations need to say, here, I'm pitching in and I'm doing my bit. So I think being more visible is something that we're going to have to consider as employees and showing the value that we actually deliver. Of course, if you extract that even further, we're now in a situation where employees, their location doesn't matter. If I want to recruit someone in to do something, but I can recruit that from anywhere. So my talent pool has just expanded. But now how do I take someone on board that I don't know?
Yeah,
it's an entirely different set of challenges, and I'm not sure we've got the answers to any of it yet. But it's coming.
You're absolutely right, and I'm certainly, that's one space I'll be looking very closely at to see how that thing actually works, how the better organisations deal with it. Incredible. And telepresence, we talk about telepresence as a thing, that's been around for a while.
Yeah.
We're starting to use that now. It's becoming actually more meaningful now. And who's to say that, who's to say that we won't see innovation which will create more of an augmented sort of relationship between staff and work? Where I did see something actually, I'm not sure who it was, right? It might have been Teams, I'm not sure, but one organization had sort of taken the step of moving 2 people, or only got Zoom, maybe 100 people linked up, right? Taking them away from that.
Buddies.
And putting them on a background so they look like they're in the same place. Now that's the first step. And when you think about innovation, it's only something simple, and some of the best innovation is the simple stuff. It's the first step. I expect to see more. I expect to see more of that, and organizations really thinking about what the remote workplace is when it comes down to people. So I'm quite excited about that, actually. Okay, we're going to close on that one, Pat. Thank you very much indeed, again, for spending time to chew over all that stuff, and thank you for our listeners for joining us as well. Join us for the next series, and we'll be talking about just as weird and wonderful stuff. So we'll join you then. Thanks very much.